There are so many different brushes on the market calling themselves the same thing. Sable brushes, synthetic brushes, bristle brushes. But what really goes into making a good bristle brush? That's what we're going to talk about today. A good bristle brush. What do I want? What am I looking for? So let's look at two different bristle brushes, okay? I have a inexpensive bristle brush here, who shall remain nameless, and a higher end brush here, the Imperial Bristle Brush. Now, at first glance, just kind of setting them out there, what do you see? Well, okay, the inexpensive brush is slightly more yellow. Does that matter? I don't necessarily think so. The color does not affect how it paints. However, I will say that when you look at the filling, meaning the hairs itself, you can just see that there's a really just a beefier amount of hair on the higher end bristle brush, which is important. Why is that important? Well, you're using a bristle brush for a number of reasons. You want spring and resiliency. It has to be able to stand up to a rough texture like a canvas, okay? A lot of times bristle brushes are used for impasto techniques. They have to power through oils. These are really ideal, bristle brushes are really ideal for oil painting techniques. And you'll also find that with a quality bristle brush, if you clean them properly, they will get softer and more attuned to you with time. They kind of get seasoned, if you will, the more you use it. The other thing that you want to look at is the quality of the brush. And I will say that this is a very light brush compared to the Imperial. The wood is probably not as dense. And I can also tell you, I don't know if you can see this, when the brushes are made, the hair is glued into the ferrule, and then there's this part here called the crimp. Now you can see that this is a very tight crimp on the Imperial Bristle brush, right? And it's smooth to my finger when I roll it across. Now here, the crimp is not quite as deep. I don't know, are you picking that? So hopefully you can see that there's like this curvature because the crimp is so tight. And here it's just not as deep, and I will also say that my finger kind of gets caught on the ridge there. It's just not as tight. Is that a deal breaker? Not necessarily, but I will say that the tighter and firmer it was put together, the more resilient it should be, especially when you think about putting these brushes in something like thinner. You want to keep all that solvent out from the interior of this, so keeping those things sealed is important. So to the eye, it might not matter. It might not be loose. You know, we've all probably picked up a brush and the ferrule's loose. That's a completely different story. This ferrule's on there very tightly and nicely, but if I stick this in solvent, will the solvent start to seep through? You want an interlocking bristle, okay? That refers to how the hairs, when you push down, sort of curve in on themselves rather than splay out, okay? So with our Imperial brush, you can kind of see how it has this curvature to it? It's kind of holding it together, okay? Now I'm not using paint in this video because I'm trying to just get to some of these points quickly, but I think that you can get the idea. And then with our less expensive brush, you see how some of the hairs just kind of start flaying out, splaying out? It won't necessarily make as clean of a line. You can also see it's fanning outward rather than tucking inward. So let me just see if I can show you those both side by side. So doing my best to show you that. Now, we've all heard that split ends are a bad thing. You know, split ends have this very negative connotation to them. You don't want split ends. You need them cut off or they'll damage your hair. When it comes to your brush, you must demand split ends, believe it or not. Split ends are basically also known as kind of flagging, where literally the ends have been split. And why do you want that in a good bristle brush? Well, they simply help hold more paint and give you more control. Those little split hairs help kind of grasp onto the paint as you paint with them, so it's not a bad thing. Now, I will say that there is one common complaint where somebody says that their brush does this one thing, and that in their mind means it's a bad brush, and I want to just kind of clear this up. If you have a new brush, especially a natural hair brush, and there are a few loose hairs, you'll see that you go and you paint and there's a loose hair in your paint. That is not necessarily the sign of a bad brush. Now, whenever you get a brand new brush, again, especially a natural hair brush, you need to prime it before you paint with it. Because just in the natural process of making a bristle brush, there are loose hairs that don't get glued down properly and crimped down properly. So all you have to do is put it in a little bit of water and just sort of work those hairs out. That could happen in an expensive brush or an inexpensive brush. What makes it a problem is if it continues to do that. That, after you've kind of prepped it, if the hairs continue to fall out, then that's the sign of a poor quality brush. So hopefully that makes sense. We talked about spring and resilience. Resilience had to do with that, how many times can it go across a rough canvas. The spring, however, has to do with how it kind of, I guess you can kind of say bounces, how it applies to the paint to a canvas. Now, with an inexpensive brush, what you'll find is that the bend, you see how when I push down, the bend happens closer to the ferrule, all right? Now, you don't want that. You would want the bend to be a little bit higher up. So if we go back to this Imperial brush, you can see the bend happens more towards the halfway point rather than closer to the ferrule. Why is that a problem or a big deal? You want to keep paint away from the ferrule as much as possible. And the more the hair bends in, the more likelihood of not only your brush touching the paint, but maybe even, without a properly trained hand or enough experience, might even drag your ferrule right through the paint while you're trying to paint it. But when the hair bends like this, it's not a bouncy response. It's kind of a bit of a floppy response, and it will get paint in here. Now, what happens when paint gets in there? It can not easily come out, meaning you can clean it really well and it gets kind of lodged in there, and then next thing you know it dries in there, and then next thing you know those interlocking bristles that are doing such a good job of holding that shape together so it comes in a nice form-fitting shape when you pull it across, starts to split because there's something in there that shouldn't be. So we want to keep paint away from the ferrule hair line, and having a good stiff chunking bristle hair. Now you want to look for that term, chunking. The Imperial Bristle is a chunking hair, high quality hog bristle hair that you want to look for. And then of course, on top of that, the filament, just how much hair is in there, will also play into that as well. Okay? When you're using a bristle brush, the other thing, along with being able to power through your paints, doing impasto techniques, is they're really great at brush stroke retention. So if you want to see the brush strokes in your art, which is something that many artists do want, especially artists that are using this in place of like a sable brush per se, bristle brush, especially a high quality bristle brush, will give you those brush strokes because they are designed to do so. And the higher quality of the brush, the better the brushstroke retention will be. All right, so when you look at these brushes side by side, I want you to look at the belly of the brush, okay? Now this isn't a watercolor brush, and a lot of times when people talk about watercolor brushes, they talk about the belly of a brush, meaning how much water it will hold. With bristle brushes, you still want it to have a bit of a belly to it, even though it won't work the same way in terms of like soaking up all that water and then dispersing it on a piece of paper. But the belly is more about how much hair has gone into it. So you can see that with the Imperial Bristle Chungking bristle brush, it's got a lot more of that chunking hair in it than the less expensive brush, which means it will give you a better response, more spring, more resilience, and it will power through more paint. Now, we've all been trained that split ends are a bad thing. We've heard it from our, barbers or stylists, what have you. You don't want split ends, it's bad for your hair. When it comes to your bristle brushes, however, split ends are a good thing. Okay, so what is a split end? It is a microscopic split or a flag that is at the end of the hair of each individual strand. Okay, and why do you want this? Well, it helps hold and grip paint and helps you distribute it more evenly across your canvas. You want that in a good brush. And I think that most brushes will do that because it's a natural thing that the hair does, especially when you're using a chunking bristle hair. So when you're trying out your brush for the first time, or you're just in an art supply store and you want to kind of give it an evaluation, the first thing I would do is look at just, you know, how beefy, I would say is the word, the belly of that brush is. How does it feel in your hand? Does the ferrule feel solid? Does it feel like it's really put together? You can generally feel when something feels better made than others. And I offer you to go and grab a couple of brushes and test them out against themselves. And then, of course, just using your hand to see where that springing breaking point is, because you want it to happen further away from the ferrule than closer. And these are good little tests that you can do in store that will let you know ahead of time whether or not it's a quality product if you are not sure. And of course, if you're in one of our local Jerry's Artarama retail stores, be sure to talk to an associate. They can definitely help you with anything that you might need. So please be sure to like the video if this was helpful to you, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell to be notified when we post new videos. And speaking of new videos, please put in the comments below something that you might want to know what makes a good so-and-so. Are you curious about sable hair? Are you curious about acrylic paint? What would you like to see more videos like this type of? And put those in the comments below.